Part 11. The Fifth Puzzle Solution. Despite how minimalist that room and its puzzle at first seemed to be, we spent a long time in there figuratively banging our heads against those bright walls. That silver key in the nook on the table, the white walls, the brightness of the room, the wire running from the nook's platform and into the wall. What did any of that have to do with Sally? We had a breakthrough when Jennifer made a certain observation almost casually. It was one that did not seem to relate very much at first to the items in the puzzle room. It related more to what I'd brought up earlier about Sally coming up with the idea of puzzles being on each floor. Jennifer pointed out that all of the other puzzles had to do with rules. While it seemed to be the case that each puzzle was more connected to one of us, every puzzle also seemed like it was trying to get us to break one rule in particular as well.
For the first floor puzzle, Jennifer said, which was related to me, we had to resist grabbing the treasure, which, according to the seventh rule, should be in the attic.
Yeah, Patrick said. That's right. And with the puzzle that related to me on the second floor, we had to get around that rule about climbing stairs. They looked at me. The one most related to me, I said. That would be the third floor puzzle. The fifth rule is about failing and solving the floor puzzles. We had to fail that one in order to succeed.
Well, let's see,
Greg said.
My puzzle is on the fourth floor, nearly got us to violate the fourth rule. About running. Huh, that's weird. Fourth floor puzzle, fourth rule. That is weird,
Jennifer said.
I'm guessing the house did that intentionally. 7th, 6th, 5th, and 4th rules. The rules are going in reverse.
By now, Jennifer was speaking a lot less casually.
If there's a pattern here, the next puzzle should not only be about Sally, but also about the third rule, the one about depositing electronics in that cubbyhole near the house's entrance.
Patrick stood up where he had been sitting. He had to steady himself against one of those white walls that made the room feel much larger than it was. He winced as he took some pressure off his bad ankle. He pointed. That wooden thing on the table, he said, with the wire running from it into the wall. That thing looks like it could be a charging station, doesn't it? We all stared at it for a moment.
You know what?
Jennifer said.
You could be right.
I think it's the silver key in there that's throwing us off, I said. If that's what it is, a charging station or something that can plug into one of our phones. We talked about it. There was no way for us to know if it was a charging station without removing the silver key lodged into the bottom of its nook. If there was some kind of apparatus that plugged into a phone down there, it might have been under where the key was lodged. Then I remembered and brought up the key that had been braided into the rotten unicorn's mane. That key had been silver too, hadn't it? It had unlocked the unicorn's bedroom that we had been trapped inside with that creature. The room was locked behind us when we left. Maybe this silver key was meant to unlock it again, so that we could go back through that bedroom, go downstairs and get a cell phone. That made us a little more confident to remove the key, something we had been reluctant to do for the fear of triggering the puzzle before we're ready. That still left the question of how to get around breaking the rule about electronics. Maybe we should break the electronic phone, Patrick said. That could be what the frayed wire is telling us. So we go downstairs, get a phone, and break it apart. Then we put it back together here and plug it in. Maybe we don't even need to break it. It could be as simple as taking out the battery.
You really think that would work?
Greg said.
Does removing the battery or some other part of an electronic device so that it no longer functions make it no longer an electronic device?
That gave us some pause. Then I remembered something else. Probably wouldn't matter, I said. You'd have to break another rule anyway. Remember that rule about solving each floor puzzle? In addition to what it says about succeeding and failing the puzzle, there is also something in there about not fleeing the puzzle. The entities might come after us anyway as soon as we leave the area.
But didn't we leave the second floor puzzle room?
Jennifer said.
To look again at some of the other rooms in that hallway on the second floor?
Maybe it's considered fleeing once you leave the entire floor, Patrick said. Or once you leave the house, Greg said. Regardless, I said, we can't stay in here forever. I don't know about you guys, but swinging on a rope upside down, getting my hand burned, climbing and sliding and fear and everything else has got me bushed. Patrick's no doubt feeling worse than I am. I think adrenaline has been propping us all up. I don't know how long that's gonna last. I think one of us should go ahead down and get a cell phone while we still have some energy in our tanks. I volunteer myself.
We should discuss it, Greg said, about who should go downstairs, if that's what we're gonna do.
Out of the four of us, I said, I might be the best person with that unicorn. It would have been Sally, but she's not here. You're worried about it attacking us again when we go back through? Patrick said. It's not that, I said. I did my best to smile. I'm thinking about writing it. Naturally, my friends protested, something along the lines of I must have a death wish. But I reasoned with them about how that unicorn could help us. As long as I wasn't running myself, the entity should only walk when they tried to get me after I left the puzzle area for the cell phone. That's what I would be counting on anyway. I also wanted to see if I could count on that unicorn carrying me faster than I could walk. There was nothing in the rules about riding a horse or a unicorn at running speed. I more or less won them over about the idea, though we had to take a vote. Greg voted against it. The majority ruled in favor. After we had what we hoped was a working solution to the final puzzle, a puzzle had gotten us thinking about the other puzzles in the house and how the rules applied to them. I got myself ready mentally, or tried to. The others patted me on the back, gave me the whole "you got this" spiel. Even Greg was warming up to the idea of cracking jokes about virgins and unicorns. I figured I might not have this, but at any rate, at least I go down with a bang, riding the back of a zombie unicorn until I was yanked off by the entities. The others got ready too, in case I had to hurl the cell phone the final distance through the railway if I didn't put the cell phone in the cart. They'd have to quickly put it down in the nook, where we hoped there was something it could attach to where the key was lodged. The plan was to take out the battery right after. If that failed to get the entities off our backs, they'd take apart more of the phone, or just try to break it. Like we had before entering that house and before starting some of the puzzles, we did our whole counting thing. Eyes open this time. Then I pulled the key out. It didn't take long for someone to fish down into the bottom of the nook. There was a small hole where the key had been lodged. Inside it was a wire head. It didn't look like any kind of wire head we were used to though. Tiny symbols were engraved in the metal prong. You had to get really close to make them out. Gold spiraling out of a treasure chest, a stairway, and more. Each symbol seemed to represent one of our previous puzzles. It may not have looked like something that would ordinarily be plugged into a cell phone, but it seemed the right size. And that, along with these symbols, made us more confident in the plan. Pocketing the silver key, I nodded to the others, then headed out of the room as quickly as I could without running. We still didn't know whether the puzzles were timed once started. Thankfully, the blade traps didn't activate when I took the railway cart back. It wasn't something I could relax about yet though, because I thought I'd probably have to face them again when returning to the puzzle room. The other silver key worked. It unlocked the unicorn's bedroom door. When I went in, the unicorn was waiting for me a few feet from the entryway, like it had heard me coming back. I tried not to pay attention to the maggots, rotting flesh, and exposed inner parts. I also tried not to think about the unicorn pulverizing me with its hooves or that broken horn it had. Well, hello again, Unitorn, I said. Alright if I call you Unitorn? You know, torn instead of corn because of how your body's all torn up? Get it? It stared at me with its huge dark eyes. One of those eyes bulged and sagged slightly more than the other. Its broken horn was lowered, but I was hoping that was more in pacification than intent to strike. How about, Pete, I said. Maybe that's a little better. Pete the Unicorn. Pete, if you help us by giving me a little ride up and down the stairs, we'll do all we can to get you out of this house. I promise. Sound like a deal? It neighed, shaking off jiggling white maggots and pieces of hair and flesh. Okay, I said. Maybe that means you understand, or maybe that was a coincidence. Either way, I'm going to try to get on you in a moment. Please don't kill me. I approached the creature and gave it some pats, which it tolerated. There may have been a saddle somewhere in that opulent bedroom, in one of the many fancy drawers of the nightstand or mirror dresser, for example. There might have been one in the closet. I did not spend time searching for a saddle, however, because I didn't know how much time we had after removing the key, and because I wasn't sure how to properly saddle a horse or unicorn to begin with.
I also remembered something Sally had told me when we were kids. Something about riding a horse without a saddle. She said it was possible, it was just harder. You had to really get a good grip on the horse's mane. I was hoping, with the state that Unicorn was in, that its mane would not completely pull away as I was riding. My hand on the Unicorn's cold, damp back, I got ready to leap onto it. I had no idea how successful I'd be without using a stirrup for my feet. I figured I'd have to do some climbing. But as I was tensing to jump, the Unicorn, surprisingly enough, knelt down for me. Thanking Pete the Unicorn while being bewildered he had done that, I climbed on. Then he stood again. I gripped his mane. I could tell that some of the hairs were better attached than others. In any case, when I tried to get the Unicorn to turn, I leaned with my body and used the grip of my legs rather than pulling on the mane. I'm not sure if that's the way you're supposed to do it, but like I said, I was worried about the rest of its hair coming out. That Unicorn was a rotting carcass after all. As quickly as I could, I got the basic idea of how to use the pressure of my legs to ask the Unicorn to change its speed. Some of that was remembering the horse riding we'd done with Sally years ago. It was strange how the Unicorn responded as well as a trained horse would. Despite the Unicorn working with me, already I was experiencing some pain while riding it, and it seemed like its bones were jabbing into me much more than a normal horse's would. I wondered if it could feel pain too, like the dead or dying plants on the front porch. I figured it had never been alive to begin with. Either way, I had no wish to cause it any more harm than what it might already be suffering by simply existing. Pete the Unicorn and I had to get downstairs. We had to grab the cell phone and come back up without getting nabbed by the entities. I wasn't sure whether they would harm the Unicorn. For that matter, I couldn't be sure if it would try to work with them and give me over to them as soon as they appeared. Speaking of the entities, they hadn't come for me yet. Or maybe fleeing the puzzle was related to the floor or related to the entire house. I rode the Unicorn over to the other of its bedroom doors, the one that didn't need a key. I leaned down and opened it. As I rode Pete into the first of the doll bedrooms, I was thankful that Greg had decided to spring that trap here earlier. I nevertheless kept our distance from that skeleton with the doll's head that had some of Sally's features. It was not long after we got to the stairs that the entities made an appearance. They were near the bottom, and some of them were already on their way up. The smaller bodies where heads should be gazed up at me from where they reclined. I had something like an epiphany of dread, of how those things might run despite the crooked limbs and the robes of the larger bodies. The smaller bodies fused at the top of them seemed much more efficiently structured and muscled. If they could somehow detach themselves from the larger bodies, they might move very fast, even faster than a person could. Maybe they would detach themselves once you started running. I didn't want to find out, but I had to risk galloping the Unicorn to see if it fell under the same rules as us. There was no way I alone could dodge all of those entities. Were there 6 or 7? While navigating the stairs at the same time. "Here we go, Pete," I said. "We got to run past those things coming up the stairs. We got to get to the front door." I tried to use the pressure of my legs as well as a hee-ah for the dramatic effect. The undead Unicorn rocketed forward. My head snapped back. My hands, which had been shaking, nearly lost their grip. Pete went down the stairs so quickly that I barely had time to react to what was happening. On the 3rd floor landing, a large, many-fingered hand reached out from the side. It nearly snatched me off Pete's back. I guess one entity had already been on the 3rd floor landing, waiting for us. Most of the others were coming upstairs with their strange, methodical dance-like rhythm. Neither they nor the smaller bodies fused at the top of them were running. That was a relief. I didn't see Walt when I glanced above, though I hadn't broken the rule about going upstairs before solving a puzzle. I was pretty sure Walt the Stairman was up there somewhere watching, wedged crazily into the top of the stairway with his crooked limbs. Walt's brethren were threat enough. I felt a scream rising in my throat as I realized that there wasn't enough room to get around the entities on the stairs. We had to go through them. I wasn't sure what they were made of. I wasn't sure how strong they were. If it came down to playing chicken, I didn't know which side would be the larger car. But that Unicorn skipped the last flight of stairs entirely. It leapt over the railing. I braced myself for impact. When we slammed down on the 1st floor, my teeth clacked together in my mouth. I tasted blood. I've got a chipped tooth from that incident. But at the time, I was just thankful we made it beyond the entities
and I was more concerned that the impact would have devastating consequences for that rotting unicorn carcass I was riding. Pete held up though. I'm pretty sure he lost some of his mass, but he held up. Pete trotted up to the front door. I leaned from the unicorn's back, wishing again I had the time and know-how to search for and put on a saddle, and I reached as far as I could into the cubbyhole until I got my hand on a cell phone. I turned the unicorn around to find an entity just a few feet away. Its smaller body had completely unfurled on the mound where the larger body's head should be. The smaller body unveiled those blade-covered upper arms. Because the entities had only been walking upstairs, it made them closer to me now than if they had been running. The ones that had been in the rear of that procession were especially close. I figured Pete couldn't pull the same magic twice, not while going upstairs. I figured we'd have to clear those entities from the stairway, so I tried leading them away by going away from the stairs. I rode Pete throughout the rooms of the first floor. They did follow, but they did something weird. They all got into the parlor, the room next to the foyer and stairs, and would not move beyond it. It was the room with that clown etched into the top of a cabinet and the Mona Lisa George Washington melted face portrait that had holes for eyes. The 6 or 7 entities gathered there. I have trouble remembering even how many gathered in that parlor. Maybe it had something to do with the distortion of air around them, like foggy glass in a mirror. At the edges of the room, they did an obscene little dance with their crooked limbs. The smaller bodies on the top of them joined in. It was as if a group of psychotic cultists combined the random stuff you see in a modern dance club with some kind of ceremonial waltz, then added a dash of their own esoteric flair. Reverent or irreverent at the same time, the crooked limbs of the larger bodies and the handless bladed arms of the upper bodies didn't help make it any less unpleasant. At the culmination of this strange dance, they all turned in my direction and waited. I was outside of the parlor at this point, looking in from the kitchen. What could I do but ride the unicorn at a gallop through the ring of them? That's what I did. I had to get back to my friends. If I'd been part of some ritual those entities had been doing in the parlor, I didn't want to think about it. I galloped Pete up the stairs into his bedroom. I gave him some pettings, assured him again that we'd try our best to get him out. The entities, for all I could tell, had no longer been chasing me. The weird dance of theirs had signaled the end of their pursuit after I'd broken a couple of rules. I had no idea what it meant, but it did seem to tell me a couple of things. One of which, they probably weren't dumb enough to have been led by me from the stairs without them realizing what I was doing. The other, they had made their own motives beyond the rules we made that were foreign to me, probably foreign to all of us. Had we created them, or had they been created by the house that we created? The entities themselves were one of those things, like the finer details of many of the house's objects and like the puzzles that we had left vague. Like the house had seemed to have done when it filled in those details. I suppose the house was filling in the details about the entities, but if the house had done so, it was almost like it had created something of its own. I thought maybe the house was making some kind of play at symbolism. The entities had those larger bodies with the smaller ones fused on, like adulthood fused to childhood, or vice versa. I had no idea what it might have been trying to accomplish in that, or what the house or the entities could want beyond scaring and hurting whoever went inside. Those were 2 motives we had worked into the house's designs when we were children. Having left the unicorn behind in that bedroom, I went through the trap, the cart with the quills and the pendulum blades. Again. I was feeling alone at first. Soon, though, I heard my friends beyond the railway. After nearly getting my head sliced through by one of those pendulums, and then nearly getting hit again by some of those quills, I figured out the prime number sequence for my second trip in the cart. Even with some near misses, I got out without a scratch the second time. The blood from that cut on my leg from the first time was still wet, a reminder of what could have happened or worse. My friends greeted me on the other side. I told them Pete the Unicorn, yes, we're calling him Pete now. No, he seems to like the name, had done admirably, as well as any unicorn from myth might do. They asked me where the entities were. I told them about that ritualistic jig the entities had done in the parlor after I'd gotten the cell phone and had tried to lead them away from the stairs. A real hoedown that. My friends weren't amused. They kept looking past me, over their shoulders, up at the ceiling, in the corners of the hall and puzzle room, everywhere, as if the entities might ambush us at any moment.
Maybe breaking 2 rules cancels those rules out,
Patrick said.
I don't think it's that simple, Greg said. It would be in the rules if it was that way.
We didn't have much time to talk about it. We didn't know how much time we had after removing the silver key from the nook in the table. I went over and pulled up the wire lead and plugged it into the cell phone. I think it was Jennifer's cell phone though. I'm not certain if that really matters. The bright lights of the room flickered before going completely out. I think I had expected a little wooden attic stairway or something to snap free of the ceiling. You know, a typical way for people to access the attic. But when those bright lights shut completely off, a door slid across the entryway and put us in pitch blackness. Needless to say, it was a big contrast to the lighting earlier. Then, the entire room began to move, like an elevator, except I didn't know if it was going up, down, left, or right. We didn't say anything, but all of us got closer to each other, and just as wordlessly, we got back to back. We tensed up. I don't know who had started it first, or if we had all started getting into that defensive arrangement at once. It reminded me in a way of the unstated reason why we had been trying to finish the haunted house as kids after Sally was gone. Without saying as much, we all thought it might help to bring her back, if we had to deal with something else that the house threw at us, here or in the attic, something we had not designed, but that the house was filling in the details for. Whatever it was would have to deal with the 4 of us. The 5th floor puzzle had been solved. As that entire puzzle room moved, we readied ourselves in darkness and silence, carrying the unspoken bonds of our childhood friendship as a light. The attic and the treasure had to be next.